Okay, so now we're going to do the final section on the judiciary, but I've decided this time what I'm going to try and do is go for a walk in my neighborhood, holding my laptop and talking. So we'll have to see. I never know what's going to happen. I can't see quite. Well, let's give it a shot. Nice sky in the background. So the last thing I want to talk about is the appropriate role of the courts in our political system. And I want to talk about two different kinds of approaches to what the courts are supposed to do. There's a group of people who identify themselves as strict constructionists, and there's another group that identify themselves as loose constructionists. And so what I want to do is I want to talk to you about their respective perspectives on how things are supposed to work. So for a strict constructionist, someone who calls himself a strict constructionist, this is what they think, this is how they believe judges should go ahead and decide cases. That what they should do is if they get a case, let's say it's a free speech case or whatever else it happens to be, that what they should do is the proper criteria for them to use when they're going ahead and they're making a decision is to go ahead and first look at what the intentions of the framers were. What did the framers have in mind? What did the framers have in mind when they wrote the Constitution? I'm going to turn around now. What did the framers... Hope that didn't make you dizzy. What did the framers have in mind when they wrote the Constitution? What were their ideas? How did they think about the Constitution? But then also, the second part, and this is really the critical part, is that judges should look at, do a literal reading of the Constitution. They should go ahead and they should look at the Constitution and see what it says. What are the exact words? What wording did the framers ultimately settle on? And then after you've done those two things, seen what the intentions of the framers were when they wrote the Constitution, and then looked at the actual wording of the Constitution, then based on that, you make your decisions. That's the way it's supposed to work for a strict constructionist. Loose constructionists have a slightly different approach. They think that in terms of the proper criteria that a judge should use when making a decision in a case, they agree that it's important to go ahead and look at what the intentions of the framers were. Everybody agrees with that idea. But rather than favoring a literal reading of the Constitution, loose constructionists would say that you have to acknowledge the fact that there have been some rather dramatic changes in society, that social values have changed. Here we go. That social values have changed, that the role of government has changed, gender relations have changed, economic situations have changed, all kinds of things have changed as a result of the progress and the changes that have been made since the time that the Constitution was written. And what a loose constructionist would say is they would say, you need to go ahead and you need to take that into account when you're making those decisions, that you have to go ahead and you have to take that into account, that things are different. You can't just do a literal reading of the Constitution because you can't just do a little... My neighbors are driving by. Now I've got the computer sitting on my car and I'm just standing in my driveway. There's my garden, by the way. Cool garden. So you can't just do a literal reading of the Constitution. You have to allow for the fact that the world has changed dramatically. So, how does this play out? Well, ask yourself a question. Do citizens have a right to privacy? Well, here's what I can tell you, that there's nowhere in the Constitution that specifically says citizens have a right to privacy. It's not in there anywhere. And so, if there was a case where, suppose a law was passed and somebody said, you know what, the government violated my right to privacy, how would that be? How would a strict constructionist approach that, and how would a loose constructionist approach that? Well, a strict constructionist would go ahead and say, he would, again, look at what was written in the Constitution, literal reading of it, look at the intentions of the framers, and he would say, you know, there isn't a right to privacy explicitly mentioned in the Constitution. So first, here, let me give you an example. Suppose a state passed a law that went ahead and made contraceptives illegal in the state. Condoms, diaphragms, the pill, contraceptives were illegal. And somebody goes ahead and sues and they say, you know what, that violates my right to privacy. if the judge in their case was a strict constructionist, what the judge would say the judge would look at it and he would go, look, there's nowhere in the Constitution that goes ahead and says you have a right to privacy. So this law is actually constitutional. It may be a stupid law. You may not like it. That's fine. But it's not unconstitutional because there is no right to privacy. Now, here's the thing. The strict constructionists would say if you believe that there should be a right to privacy, there's a remedy for that. There's a way to solve that problem. Pass a constitutional amendment. Pass a constitutional amendment that says, citizens have a right to privacy. Boom. Then if that constitutional amendment gets passed, then you can go ahead and you can sue the state and say, hey, look, they made contraceptives illegal, right? I'm going to sue. The courts are going to look at it and go, hey, these people have a right to privacy, and this law violates that right to privacy. Done. So strict constructionists would say, if there's no right to privacy listed in the Constitution, a judge can't just pretend that there's a right to privacy. They can't just assume there's a right to privacy. It's either there or it's not there. A loose constructionist would approach it differently. A loose constructionist would say, yeah, there's no right to privacy listed in the Constitution, but there are other rights that are listed that imply a right to privacy. So, for example, in the Constitution, one of the things that it says is that in order to search somebody, you need to have a warrant. You can't just go ahead. Police can't just walk into your house and search your house. Say, I think you're guilty of something, and just search your house. So you have some privacy. You can't be forced. In the Constitution, it says that you can't be forced to house soldiers in your house. They can't come in and say, hey, look, we're operating in this area. We need some place to stay. We're going to be staying in your house. It's unconstitutional. They can't do it. So what the courts, what a loose constructionist would say is he would say, you know what? There isn't a right to privacy listed in the Constitution, but a right to privacy is implied by other rights, and so therefore it is appropriate for the courts to go ahead and declare that law unconstitutional and to say from now on it should be assumed that there is a right to privacy. So a loose constructionist would say the courts are appropriate. It's appropriate for the courts to go ahead and do that. A strict constructionist would say no, it's not appropriate for the courts to do that. Okay, so I'm going to stop here, and I'll finish up on the next. I'll finish up on the next video, and then this lecture will be over. If I can find the little button to go ahead and turn it off, because it's very hard to see. Oh, there we are. See you in another video.